What's up, guys? Sub-Zeric here. Let me get the music. Breaking news! Breaking TFT news! Mortdog just tweeted that stats for augments are being banned once again from TFT. This is huge, huge news. This was highly controversial the first time it happened, and will very likely be highly controversial this time. All right, let me switch to my my lo-fi music, and we can talk through all of this. I'm gonna read through Mortdog's post. And you know, we're just gonna talk through it all, baby. How's my how's the audio? Sounds kind of low. There we go. Well, let's pump it up a little bit. Just hopefully it's not too loud for you guys, but I needed it to be louder for that. Okay, so stats, augment stats are being banned once again. Well, what does this mean if you are not familiar with the augment stat ban in the first place? I guess I'll just read the beginning of Mortdog's post. So he said, "Hey folks, I'd like to talk to you about removing augments from the end of game and match history and therefore from stats websites. The last time we tried to remove the augment stats in Runeterra Reforged, we saw some immediate positives towards TFT game health. Lobbies had a wider range of augments taken, unique compositions crafted, and innovative strategies appeared more frequently. However, due to the way we implemented the change, people could scrape match history, creating unfair advantage. You can read about the last time we talked about this on Reddit. Since then, we've been monitoring the impact and are still unhappy with what stat sites do to how players interact with TFT. Rather than experiment, and look, we got augments right here, better check the stats there, Soap. Rather than experiment and explore the large amount of content, players rush to conclusions based on that data. In addition, we've seen on the competitive side that not every region has equal access to stats, which creates another competitive integrity issue. We saw at the Vegas Open that having everyone play without access to those led to a fantastic event with unique plays. Anyone remember Malala's learning to spell victory back when that augment was not high priority?" And then, yeah, he basically said they kept portals out of stats, and, you know, they were cool with that. Anomaly buffs are not going to be in stats. So with the spirit of game health and competitive fairness, we'll take another stab and remove augment stats from match history, starting with the launch of Into the Arcane. And so they're gone for match history, therefore they can't be scraped. We know some players won't be happy with the change, and we get that, but that does not change that it's the fairest thing to do for future competitions. Past that, this change will also lead to better game health and enjoyment. Having tried this once before, we're pretty confident in our updated approach to this decision. All that said, we will monitor and change if it turns out we were wrong. Have fun, enjoy the launch of Into the Arcane, and take it easy. So, all right. Bit of a TFT history lesson for all you guys who weren't playing back when this first happened. This was Runeterra Reforged, right? This was 9.0 that they removed stats. I will say, I guess now that I think about it, Runeterra Reforged was 9.0. That was the set where I went second at Shrima Cup, my best tournament performance of all time. So maybe I should enjoy this change. Maybe I'm really good in a statsless environment. But that aside, if you guys weren't around for 9.0, what Riot essentially said going into that set is they just don't like TFT stats existing in the game. It leads to a lot of consolidation of what players are doing. You know, people will see an augment that's, well, people will do, you know, the no flame to Robin songs because obviously he's a fantastic player, but they'll do the Robin songs thing where they'll pull up 3 augments, type in all the augments into the stats website and be like, oh, well, this one's better than this one, so I'll take this. Obviously, Robin, a great player, and he does more than just that. But you will, if you've ever watched his stream, you will see him doing exactly that, looking up the stats and picking, you know, saying, oh, well, this augment's got better stats than this, so I gotta take this. And they don't like that. They don't like that as a play pattern in TFT, and I think that's completely understandable. That is a really annoying play pattern for a game like TFT, where, you know, the idea of TFT is that you're innovating constantly. You're always thinking of, you know, new lines that you can play with different augments. There should be excitement every time you see augments, and your brain should be turning when you see a set of augments and saying, oh, I could like cook with this augment. You know, Dishsoap took this Renan's augment. Oh, I could, you know, play, you know, a bunch of Renans on my carries and go pew 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 pew, and it would be really sick. Or, you know, maybe I have one augment that synergizes really well with another augment that I'm like cooking and creating these combinations. That's the idea behind augments, and it's a really cool fantasy for your game in general, that, you know, we should be on the fly, you know, changing our game plans, finding really cool combinations. You know, this makes me think back to our final game of the World's Championships that I've odd reviewed, where Title won, where he took Stim Pack that gives him 4 components, and then he ended up getting What the Forge. Obviously, that's a combination of augments that is really broken, because you're essentially getting 2 Ornn items for a silver augment, disgustingly broken together. And that's what augments should be all about, finding these really cool, innovative, broken combinations and using those to, you know, win the world championships. So I think that's a really, really good example of like the ideal setup for Augment, where it falls into kind of the opposite, the super disideal. What is the opposite of an ideal? I'm not sure. But when it falls into the opposite, that's when, there are these stats checks and you look at your first three augments and you see, this augment looks really cool, but I looked up the stats, it's a 4.6. I'm not taking an augment that's a 4.6. I'll take the generic augment that, doesn't make as much sense for my spot, but hey, it's a 4.4, so, I have to take it because it's better. That's not what TFT is all about. And so much of TFT, as we've gotten further and further, has gone into things like Explorer. This is something that, has been done to death. But, say you are playing, and this is obviously last set, we don't have this for current times, but say you're playing an Ari comp, and so what you do is you put Ari, you put Zoe, you put Lilia, you put Poppy into your tactics.tools explorer, you go to augments, you look at the augments based on, and you're checking your 3-2 augment, you go to augments, you have a silver augment, you filter this down, and if you see Exiles versus Young, Wild, and Free, you picked Exiles because it's got better stats than Young, Wild, and Free. Also, I just realized I can get rid of this WIP thing that I have for other stuff. Okay, but you do this and you say, okay, what's the best augment to take here? Exiles. And sometimes you'll even go as far as to say like, okay, I already took at 2-1, I took silver ticket, and now at 3-2, I have a gold augment. So like, what gold augments should I be looking at here? And you get like really, really deep into the exactly what the stats tell you should pick, which I will 100% agree with Riot Games. That's not a fun way to play the game. This kind of like paint by numbers. What did the stats say? Okay, I'm taking that. And the best players who are really, really good at this kind of stuff, I will pull up. Well, let me pull up something actually. I'm sure Wigwug won't mind me pulling this up. But Wigwug, if you guys don't know, let me find him in my. Oh, I gotta find him in my Discord. I'll let this play while I find him. Wigwug, challenger player, has absolutely been popping off the last few sets, and he created this spreadsheet going into regionals, and this was his spreadsheet going into regionals. So he had basically every comp here that he was thinking about playing, and all of the broken augments in all of these comps. And how he got this is, he looked at the stats. Obviously, he went to each of these different comps, either by using, I didn't actually ask him exactly how he did, but he either went to Explore and just put, Seraphine 3, Soraka 3, or he used the actual like comps page on something like tactics.tools, and then pulled up all of these stats for these different augments and typed them out into a spreadsheet so that when he's in game, he doesn't have to actually pull up all these stats. He has these. And, Wigwug sent this to me because I was playing in Chronon Cup or something, and I was like, what's your prep? I know you've been, like 1000 LP for like the last few patches. Like you've obviously done very well this set. And he sent that to me and said, yeah, this is basically, obviously that's not his entire prep. Obviously he's doing other stuff, but that was part of his prep, is delving really, really deep into the stats. And I think it is unequivocal that I mean, maybe not unequivocal. I don't know. I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts on this. A lot of people would say that that's just not fun. It's just not good for the game. That part of your game has to be like doing the homework. I saw some people talking about this and saying, it's kind of like checking the stat sites is kind of like doing my homework. And I don't want to have to do my homework when I'm playing a video game. I want to just play the game and have fun. But you have to check the stat sites and do your homework, because if you end up taking an augment that's ends up being really, really bad in your comp, and you haven't looked ahead and like realized that, then it can absolutely decimate your performance in the game. I think that's like absolutely something that can and does happen. And so you kind of have to do your homework. I remember this happened to me so many times. This happened to me in a cup. I forgot what cup it was. It was a set with Punk. That was set 11, right? That was set 11 with Punk. And I took an augment. I was playing Punk Reroll, a comp that I was really, really not familiar with. And I took an augment. And then in hindsight, I looked back and realized another augment, the one that gives you Edge of Nights, was actually really, really solid in that comp, because you can throw it onto Vi, you can throw it onto somebody else. And the Edge of Nights augment was actually really, really good. And I messed up by not taking that. And, that was a situation where I should have actually checked the stats ahead of time. If I had checked the stats, I would have known that Edge of Night augment was really, really solid. I could have taken that, and I could have been in a much better spot than I was, because I wasn't as familiar with the line. And so it's at that point kind of required reading to do that, because I am sure that so many people in my lobby were doing exactly that in those kind of, high stakes tournaments where you're trying to be the best players in your region, there are tons of people who every single time they get an augment, they're typing their comp in, typing their stats in, and trying to figure out what the best augment is stats wise. So I think we can all agree that this is not good for TFT. Well, maybe we can't. I'm curious to hear what you guys say, but I think a lot of people would agree that it's not great for TFT, that a lot of the gameplay is dumbed down to this just, can you essentially Google the answer to the question, aside from like, instead of coming to the answer yourself. A lot of people don't like that. And the comparison has been made to stuff like poker, where there's like poker engines that have kind of like solved the game. Chess is a really, really obvious example where chess engines have just said, you know, they always, the correct play is when you're in this setup to always make this move, because, you know, we've done these thousands of games that we've looked ahead, and in the future, you know, you have a better win rate if you make this move than this move. And I don't know, there's some mixed feelings about that. Another example that I always remember when I've talked about this in the past that someone brought up, and that if people haven't seen the AlphaGo documentary, I would absolutely recommend. That's a fantastic documentary. I'm pretty sure it's free on YouTube. But it's a documentary about how these people used AI. I believe it's AI, but neural networks. I don't know exactly what all that stuff is and how it works. But they used some really, really smart computer stuff to basically solve the game of Go, the game where you have all the little circles and you try to surround your opponent's circles with your circles. So they used AI to essentially solve that. And they had I believe it was like the world champion at the time, like the best, you know, the faker of Go. And he played against this AI and he lost to the AI. And I believe not long after that, he essentially quit Go. He said, this takes the soul out of the game if I'm just playing against a computer. And I think I think for a lot of people, that is kind of their idea, is that, you know, when you have all of these stats, when the game just becomes building whatever the best win rate, you know, taking whatever the best win rate augment is, it does kind of like take out the soul of TFT and make it so that, you know, you're meant to, you're not playing the game, you're letting stats play the game for you. And I think a lot of people really, really hate that. And so I think a lot of people, when this stats change happened in 9.0, because, you know, go back to the story for all of you TFT Zoomers out there who haven't played in 9.0, a lot of people were hesitant about the change, but, you know, a lot of people were like, you know, okay, I'm willing to try this out. What happened though in 9.0, actually, the site's website is the site is down, but I went into the Wayback Machine and found it, though it like crashes every time I open it up. Is people created websites like this. This was this app that this guy created, and what he essentially did is he went into LOL chess, pulled all of a bunch of really, really good players' LOL chesses using, you know, programming, and summed up all of their stats and said, okay, you know, all the people that we saw, that all the shimmers, there's, you know, 4,000 people who have taken this augment, and, you know, on average, if they take it at 4 or at 2.1, they average of 4.01. So they basically like recreated augment stats without obviously using Riot's API, which is where a lot of places get their augment stats now. And, you know, before then and since then, they get their augment stats just from Riot's API. But instead, they basically like scraped them themselves. Now, what Mortdog said in his post is that's not going to happen anymore. We are not going to have, people called this like black market stats at the time, where it's like, you know, there's some guy out of his truck and he's dealing you some stats. Hey kids, you want some stats? We're not going to have this anymore, according to Riot, because they're essentially going to make it so that it doesn't even show up at the end of game screen. So even a site like LOL Chess will just not even show those stats. There is also another concern that was my immediate concern, is a site like MetaTFT. MetaTFT has an app, and using their app, they can just pull from their app the augments that everyone have taken. They don't need to go through Riot Games API, and they have a lot of stats. They had stats for portals last set, which is one of Mort's examples on how there's no like portal stats because they don't have them end of game screen. MetaTFT had those stats because they can pull it from their app. It has been said, essentially, maybe not like officially announced, but it has been kind of hinted at by Riot and people in like other like Discords and type things, that if a site like MetaTFT were to do that, they would risk losing their API access, which is really, really bad for MetaTFT. You know, it means they would not have a good relationship with Riot Games, and there's no way that MetaTFT or any other stats website wants that. So I do think we are going to see much more adherence this time to the stats ban, because, you know, random people with random API access cannot now access the stats. The only sites that could do that are sites like, MetaTFT, who has an app, op.gg has an app. They could probably, pull that information from there as well. Who else? Other places have like overlays and apps that like that kind of stuff. And so, it's essentially been said those are basically the only place where you would theoretically maybe be able to get stats, but Riot said that's not going to happen. We are not going to allow stats to occur that way. So this means we're going to be flying blind with the from the perspective of stats. There are going to be no stats really. So what are the downsides to this? Because I've talked through the affirmative case for this of, it makes the game a lot more interesting from the perspective of like creativity. It means that you don't have to do all of this homework and look up all these stats. You can just end up, playing the game and having a good time and going from there. So what are the downsides to this? The first downside, I think the most egregious downside in my opinion, is sometimes when you read an augment, that's not what that augment actually does. And stats can help you, can help fix that problem. So, for example, combat bandages last set. If you read it, it was a very, very strong augment, but for a decent number of patches, the augment was just completely bugged and was much worse than actually reading the augment would indicate. There was just a bug with the augment. Spin to win was another example where that augment was egregiously poorly bugged. Remember, I think they did the change in the patches, and it was like instead of like it was something on the realm of like instead of being like a 20%, it was like a 2% or something like that. That's not the exact number, but that's the idea. Those things can be seen easily in stats. You pull up your op.gg and look at the stats for augments, and you see that the augment has terrible stats, even though maybe it reads as like a pretty good augment. We're not going to have that anymore. Now, once again, I have heard that Riot has said, we're listening to this feedback because that is a really big piece of feedback, and what they're going to try to do is be very, very communicative about what augments and things like that are bugged. Not even necessarily because there is sometimes this kind of scary thing where like they'll say in like private channels, like these channels that I'm talking about, that X augment is bugged, but then in public channels they won't do a good enough job of making that clear. That's happened a lot in the past, and I don't think that's obviously bad. If like pro players have access to this information because they're talking to rioters on the reg, and the casual players do not have the information, that's quite bad. They've said that they are going to be much better in with regard to that, and so all I can say is we'll see. We will see. Obviously, I really, really trust Riot Games. I hold their devs and everyone in really high regard. So I don't think that they would intentionally, mislead people with regard to that. That being said, it is a really hard thing to be aware of every single bug and to make people aware of every single bug. How do you even do that? They don't really have a great distribution channel outside of just like Mort tweeting out a list of bugs, a few days into the patch. And, sometimes really good players will find a bug earlier on into the patch, and that won't actually have time, and that won't trickle down to the uninformed masses until someone like Dish Soap or Robin Songs like says it on stream or something. So I hope that we can get to a world where those bugs are made really, really obvious and people know just don't take these augments because they're broken in a bad way. The other big question, big problem, is this right, or is this good or bad for the game? Is some people say, this really benefits the insanely dedicated TFT players who have time to jam, 1,000+ games a set. Because if I'm a casual TFT player, if I'm not even because I wouldn't call myself a casual TFT player, but I'm not someone who grinds out thousands of games a set. I play like 300 to 400 games a set. And maybe this set I'll play more, but I say that every set and then I don't. So if I'm playing 300 to 400 games a set, and there are, like 200+ augments or something like that, I don't know the exact number, there will be a lot of games, even 100 games into the set, where I see an augment and I've never taken that augment before. Stats help me get kind of a baseline for the strength of that augment, because what Mort said when he did this initially, well, maybe not he did this because it's the whole Riot team did this, but when they did this initially, Mort was like, how many games do you need to understand the strength of an augment? Like 5 games or something like that, 2 games, 5 games, he said something like that. And a lot of people took offense to that because they said, you absolutely cannot determine how strong an augment is just in, even 5 games, because there's a lot of individual factors that go down. Maybe you take an augment and it's the most broken augment of all time. It averages like a 3.0, but you have a really bad spot for it. And you end up losing that game. Are you then going to overreact in that spot and say, hey, this augment is what caused me the problem, and I'm never going to take that augment again. And then you end up playing, suboptimally for the rest of the set. I do think, I believe I talked about this the last time they did this. It does actually, because if you're a really good player, what you do is you can actually evaluate how good that augment was in your position and what it actually did for you, and say, you know what, the reason this game went wrong is not actually because this augment was bad for me. It's because, my early game was poor, or because the comp that I chose was bad. And it's really hard to disentangle those things in TFT, but I'm not completely against that being a skill set that exists in TFT, is evaluating things like augments and items just based on their numbers, based on, the eye test of watching them in game. I don't think that's necessarily a bad skill set to have. To test for in TFT, because essentially we don't test for that right now. You can look up augment stats, you can look up item stats, you can look up comp stats and figure those things out yourself. But I do think it is potentially a good thing for the game to have more of that as a way of skill testing, of saying, okay, you know what, this performed really, really well. Why did it perform well? Let me look and see. I have an augment that makes my board a lot tankier. How tanky actually is my board? Is my board dying quickly, or is this giving me the tankiness that I need? I have an augment that makes my board deal more damage. What is 20% damage amp? How do I compare that to something like a Giant Slayer, something like a Guard Breaker? And what is that actually doing for my board? I do think those are potentially good skills to test for. It is just obviously crazy because it's not something we've ever really, we haven't had that for a long time in TFT. So those are the two big arguments against it. I guess there is another idea that kind of like this makes quote unquote like study groups even more important, where if you have a group of people and they can tell you, because instead of me playing 400 games a set, maybe I play 400 games a set, but maybe I'm in a study group with somebody who plays 1,000 games a set. And if that player can give me the information that X augment is busted because I've played it 5 times on this patch already, and every time I've taken it, it's been broken, that's really helpful for me. And a lot of new TFT players, and looks like this is the end of the game for Dish Soap, so let's just skip into the next game while we keep going. I'm almost done talking, but I had some more stuff that I wanted to throw out there. But that there is an argument to be made that makes these kind of study groups even more important, and it means that if you're a player watching this video and you're like a diamond TFT player, and you want to become challenger, but you don't obviously have those contacts yet in TFT, you don't have a relationship with really, really good players, obviously, because you are yourself trying to learn the game and get better, and so you don't have that access. The argument can be made that this disadvantages you, because stats kind of level the playing field. You have all of these people who are looking at the same stats, whereas in this world we are going to have a bunch of people actually looking at not being able to look at stats, and you're gonna have a lot of other people who are just kind of figuring out on their own what the quote unquote stats really are, by just playing a lot of games and figuring that out. Kind of like a rough idea. Maybe the augment is actually a 4.4, but we realize that it's just like overall like a strong augment. I think that is a legitimate worry, but I do think at the end of the day, studying with other people and like putting in that work, you don't necessarily have to straight up study with other people. You can watch VODs that can give you insight into these kind of stats. I think VOD watching will be very important. There is also kind of another piece of it, which is like kind of like public tier lists. So I'm 100% sure that we are going to have like public tier lists on places like TFT Academy, like Froda and Dish Soap's website, TFT Academy, or Robin's website, the TFT Handbook. And these are going to be curated by strong players, and who are going to essentially give you that information. And so this kind of reduces that downside. But then I think a lot of people go right from there. They say, well, if we're just going to replace a stats website with a tier list, is that really a useful change? Is that helpful? I would say in the ideal world where this works out perfectly, I do think that is actually a better world, because instead of saying this augment's a 4.55 and this augment's a 4.51, I'm going to take the 4.51 augment. You just have this huge swath of augments that are B tier, and if you end up taking a B tier augment, that gives you more room for expression as a player. So I would say that in general, I do think that's potentially a positive for the game. That, you know, if we move from stats websites to, you know, tier lists, I think that could potentially be a positive for the game. But yeah, I would say this is obviously a really big change. That's basically my entire piece. I'm really, really curious what you guys have to say about this, what you guys think about this, if you guys like this, dislike this, if there are people here who remember what it was like back in set 9, or if there are people who are, you know, new to TFT and have like a completely, you know, unbiased, unexperienced opinion on this. I would love to hear what all you guys have to think about it. But yeah, it's a crazy change. Like I said, I'm going in with you know, an open mind on this. I think Riot wanted to do this from the start, but then they realized there were kind of like the black market stats, and they realized that all that was doing is selecting for the even more engaged people who want to check out black market stats, which is like already, you know, like people who check stats as a percentage of the player base. And then if you go down another percentage, it's just, you know, optimizing for the people who are putting the most time in to find like a weird stats website, which I don't think they wanted. But now they have this solution where there's essentially gonna be no black market stats. There's gonna be no stats whatsoever. I'm down to give it a try, certainly, but I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, comment, and subscribe. Check my Twitch. I'll have the links down below. Thank you guys, as always, for watching.